What it do? Welcome to another new episode of Locked On Bucks. On today's show, the Bucks' 6-game win streak comes to an end after getting blown out by the Warriors in Golden State. The Bucks lost 125-90, and now the Bucks are 6-1 coming out of the All-Star break. How did a team that looked so promising coming out of the break get smoked so badly? We'll try to answer that question and dive into it on today's episode.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Camille Davis, and you can catch me weekly on the Technical File Podcast and Pack a Day Podcast, as well as Cheesehead TV, carry the G and MKE during the NFL season. Joining me today is Justin Garcia of the Bucks Radio Network, and we appreciate you for tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off of your first purchase. After this game, Justin, I checked Twitter. You know, when you lose by 35, it's just kind of like, okay, where do we go from here? Open up my app. First thing I see is that you and Frank tweeted at almost the exact same time about the crazy run that the Warriors went on to close the game. And honestly, I think that's really like the story of the game. The Bucks really only played a good 7.5 minutes throughout this game. Bucks entered halftime down 20, and the Bucks were able to cut the Warriors lead down to 6 in the third quarter with about 5.5 minutes to go. It was a 19-5 Bucks run at that time, and the Warriors respond with a 42-13 run to close the game. And like you said, and you and Frank both mentioned it, it's really hard to win a game when the other team goes on a 42-13 run.
I mean, it's really hard to win a game when the other team goes on multiple runs, but like sustained runs. That was the big one because of where you were at in the stage of the game. But even before that, when we think about where this game was early in the first quarter, I was impressed. I'm sure we'll get to it, and you were too, with the way the Bucks started offensively. But at the same time, you did kind of feel like, boy, I don't know about this. I don't think this is sustainable, because Doc Rivers himself has made the mention that we're not an up-tempo team. Mm-hmm. And he had been asked about the pace taking a step back since he had taken over, and basically had said, I'm not too concerned about pace. I more am looking at ball movement and the types of possessions we're getting. And added the caveat too of, plus Damian Lillard doesn't really like to play up tempo. He picks his spots, so we're going to be a slower team. The pace that the Bucks were playing at to start the game, you were like, okay, we got an offensive game here, and it seems like they're finding some transition opportunities. But then you also realize this is going to open the door for a lot of back and forth play, and that suits the Golden State Warriors much better than it does the Bucks. It was at about the midpoint of the first quarter that the Warriors, or late, I think it was with 5 or so minutes left, that they started to push that lead open. But the final few minutes of the first quarter, it went from like a 4 or 5 point game to a double-digit Warriors lead. And then early in the second quarter, that thing really opened up, and before you knew it, it was 20. So that was a pretty big run. It was pretty similar to what we saw to close the game. But I think you still came away saying, they did not play good. The Bucks did not play very good defensively in the first half. Transition was a major issue. Yes. They just didn't look connected either with some of the switches and everything else they were doing. They looked much closer to the team we had seen up until January 23rd than they did what we had seen since. So the way they started the third quarter, very encouraging. We thought, okay, this is looking more and more like the group that we've been seeing here for the last couple of weeks. And what was most impressive in all of that to me was that was like 5 minutes that they took to get that thing from 20 down to 6. But then it's almost like the old adage when you're climbing up the hill and you can't rest, right? You got to keep going the whole way up. And the Bucks did kind of rest and then just slid back down the hill.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt at multiple times throughout this game, I would just keep saying, hey, Bucks, cut this lead down to single digits. Like, you're going to be okay. You cut it down to single digits. It's going to be okay. They would get it kind of close, and then the Warriors would extend that lead. So coming out in the third quarter, it was like, okay, you're down by 20. What can we really do here? And at halftime, I was looking at the numbers, and I was like, Bucks are getting killed fast break. They're getting killed points in the paint. And those are two trends that just extended throughout the course of the game. Like, the Warriors are an undersized team. They're not that big. And for the Warriors to outscore the Bucks in the paint 54-36 throughout the course of the game was an unexpected surprise to me. I mean, the Warriors were just aggressive, moving quickly. And watching how they're playing, you're like, okay, they're getting up their threes, which you expect. The Warriors are coming into this game after being embarrassed by the Celtics, losing by over 52 points. So you knew they were going to come in the game and play with an increased intensity level, especially given the fact that Steph Curry did not play well in that game against the Celtics either. But in this game with the Bucks and the Warriors, both teams take 32 threes, and you're like, or 39 threes, and you're like, okay. Warriors made 8 more threes than the Bucks. I mean, the Warriors were shooting really well, especially in the first half. It cooled off in the third quarter when the Bucks were getting on their run, and somewhat into the fourth as well. But even with the Warriors making 8 more threes than what the Bucks made, if the Bucks would have made the same amount, they still would have lost by 11 points, because the points in the paint battle, like, the Bucks just lost that thoroughly as well throughout this game. And it's not the way we've seen this team look so far coming back from the break. Like, we've talked about how the transition defense has looked improved for the Bucks, the fast break defense. Like, it's been so much better so far. Even points in the paint, like, the Bucks were number 1 in the league, only allowing like a little over 40 points in the paint since the All-Star break. And for the Warriors to come out and score 54 of them, like, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, and they're in the bottom, I think 5, the Warriors are somewhere around that area in terms of their averages per game. Less than 50, I think it was around 48 that they averaged coming into the game last night, which, you know, it wasn't a massive outperformance, but it was an area that you looked at and said, we should be able to hold the Warriors to their season average, and arguably lower as well, with Giannis and Brook Lopez protecting the paint and the way that the Bucks have been playing defensively. I know I had mentioned prior to this 4-game road trip that I thought all these teams were pretty good matchups for the Bucks, and we have seen the Bucks play very good against the Warriors in recent years. But I do think I'm not going to say we, because I made the statement, but what is easy to lose sight of is, yeah, you know, I know Steph Curry has had some big games in that stretch, but the Bucks also had this guy named Drew Holiday that was playing on the perimeter that helped you slow down a very perimeter-based offense of the Warriors. And that, to me, is what stood out the most is, look, if you play this team multiple times over a couple of days in a series, but if you saw them more frequently, I think the Bucks would be much better prepared with this unit. It was just that change in what Drew Holiday takes away, because there was a lot of open shots for the Warriors. That's nothing new with their ball movement, and they finished the game last night with 37 assists on 51 field goals, which is just an insane assist rate, basically 75%. But that's their game, right? There's a lot of ball movement, and I think you did see quite a bit, especially in the first half, moments of frustration from Brook Lopez, where we mentioned they weren't quite as connected, and it looked like Brook was calling out a couple of times, where's the help on this? That I'm having to step up here and move further away from the rim. And that's just not a great matchup when you have Steph Curry taking Brook Lopez off the dribble, or whoever it was, Brandon Pajemski. So I think that was one of the bigger things is, you know, this has been a much better team defense, but you still need some individual wing defenders, and you had a pretty good one in the last few matchups, at least the last few years against the Warriors. He was gone this year, and I think that absence is very notable.
Yeah, absolutely. In this, and the defense is easy to point to, as we mentioned. We've talked about it. Like, the Bucks defense has been so much more improved. So when you see that they give up 125 points, it's just kind of like, okay, what really happened here? And Doc Rivers post game, his comments were really interesting, because he was like, I don't even really think the defense was the biggest problem with the Bucks tonight. And he was like, I know that's going to sound weird, but I don't think that was the biggest problem. So when we come back from the break, I want to dive into some of the things that Doc Rivers mentioned post-game about why he feels the Bucks lost the rope in this game and weren't able to come out with the victory. So we'll get to that right after this. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little further? Have you ever wondered what type of adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have, and they have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Its class exclusive Google built in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone because Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is a perfect mid-sized crossover for your next adventure. But Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, which has room for up to 8 people. Also has an expansive cargo capacity and advanced available 4x4 capability. And with 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is going to be there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find yourself on the next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. We appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Bucks. Your time is valuable. So every listen, every watch, every like, every share, greatly appreciated. Whether it's a win or a loss, y'all be here dedicated, and shout out to y'all for that. Got to tell you a little bit more about what else we're doing at Locked On, because we have Locked On Sports Today, which is the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And it's now available on the Amazon Fire TV app and the free Fire TV channel app as well. Locked On Sports Today, 24/7 coverage of the top sports stories of the day with all the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. You can find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Post game, Doc came in and said, this is going to, I'm just going to direct quote, because I was like, this is really interesting to me. Quote, this is going to sound like a little shock to you, but I really didn't think this was our defense. I thought it was our offense. I didn't think we played solid offense all night. They have 21 points off of our turnovers. They had 15 blocked shots. So they were in transition or in offense the whole game due to our bad offense tonight. This is the first night in a long time where we just didn't play together, didn't move the ball. We forced action. So I thought it was more of that. We had a lot of defensive breakdowns for sure, but a lot of them were in transition where we weren't matched up because our floor balance was so bad tonight. We took so many bad shots. We had too many bad possessions that when we got back, we were never matched up and they took advantage of it, end quote. With Doc pointing to the offense as the main reason for the loss in this game, how did you feel about his message?
I 100% agreed. I was actually glad to hear that from Doc.
Same.
And I talked about it on the radio post game as well, that, even everything we just went through in the previous segment of they weren't very connected defensively. The Warriors, their ball movement is tough to defend overall. That's why it's important to stay connected. But with all of that being mentioned, to me, it felt like the offense that lost you the game. And again, look, there's nothing we can do about it, but the absence of Chris Middleton, to me, really stood out in this game. When you look at the half-court offense, the Bucks finished in the first percentile in their offensive efficiency in that game. I think they're in the 5th percentile in their effective field goal percentage as well. So it was not great. And a lot of that started in the half-court where, it also, it seemed like Giannis, it was great to have him on the floor, but it didn't really feel like, despite the way he started, when it seemed like he was going to be a one-man wrecking crew, something seemed a little, I hesitate to say off, but I think Giannis was not 100%. He just looked a bit different last night. Yeah, not quite that extra gear that he typically has. And you thought maybe you'd get the boost from Damian Lillard, but that was, one of those games where you kind of needed Damian Lillard to take over. I mentioned too, we so often get wrapped up in, Steph Curry versus Giannis, but it's not quite the Spider-Man meme, but Steph Curry and Dame Lillard and the similarities that they have, it was, okay, we get a chance to see Steph versus Dame. Steph and Draymond did not play in that first matchup between these two teams. And this was the first time in 3 years, basically, that Steph and Dame played in the same game in the regular season, but you didn't get quite enough there. And I think it really boils down to a couple of pieces. Number one that stood out statistically, Malik Beasley's in a pretty bad funk right now shooting the basketball. Another rough night from Malik, 0 of 6 on threes. I was a little surprised that Doc waited as long as he did to bring in AJ Green when nobody else kind of had their shot working. And we saw AJ play all of the fourth quarter against the Clippers. But AJ Green finished the game with some struggles shooting the basketball as well. So between he and Malik Beasley, you go 0 of 11 on your threes. You really needed at least one of those guys to start to pop off, and you didn't get it. But to me, the big part, and I think this is a lot of what Doc Rivers was getting to, you were doing everything right. And your defense was starting to create more opportunities for your offense. That sparked that big run to start the third quarter when you got that margin from 20 all the way down to 6. But as soon as that happened, that's what we started to see from the offense, that your defense lost some of its connection. You gave up that wide open look to Trace Jackson Davis under the basket. It's back up to 8. Bobby Portis then had a pretty rough stretch of play when you really needed him. And that's the other thing that kind of went unnoticed is Bobby Portis maybe kept you in the game as
Absolutely.
much as we can say that for being down by 20, but just imagine where they would have been without him. And he was basically absent in the second half. And that stretch, once you knock the margin down to 6, is where his absence really stood out. Because I think it was 2 or 3 turnovers immediately after that from Bobby alone, missed shots as well. And that just sparked the Warriors. So you were doing everything right, and then your offense wasn't reciprocating and wasn't putting your defense in a good spot.
Yeah, Bobby Portis had a really big first half. I literally said at one point, like, he's helping keep the Bucks in this game right now. He had 18 points in the first half, and he got those in like 10 minutes. But he finished the game with 20 points, so he only scored 2 additional points in the second half. He didn't take that many shots. He only took 4 shot attempts in the second half, but you mentioned the turnovers. In addition to that, he got into that little, I don't want to call it even a scuffle, just a little tie up with Draymond, got his 5th foul. And at that point, like, it's like you're feeling things slip from the Bucks at that point in the game. And I'm also glad you brought up Giannis because, I mean, we talked about it. We saw how he looked in the pre-game warm-ups against the Clippers where clearly that Achilles was giving him some trouble. And you see him in this game, super happy to see him playing. Started the game off well, but it just looked like he didn't have the same amount of lift. And I saw that in particular when you're seeing him getting defended by Tracy. And it's like, okay, Giannis is getting blocked twice in the same possession back to back. You don't see that often. Like, I believe all of Tracy Jackson Davis's blocks were against Giannis. In that
them,
game,
yeah. Like he joins that exclusive club that I think is just he and Jonathan Isaac now of players to have blocked Giannis 3 times in a game.
See, like it was one of those games for him, but it just didn't like it just happy he was out there. It just didn't seem like he had the same lift. And of course, when you ask Giannis about it, he's like, I'm perfectly fine. On Wednesday, I wasn't, or on Monday, I wasn't 100%, but I felt good to go. So I went. That's not an excuse. And even Doc mentioned that himself, like, yeah, we know he was banged up, but when you're in the game, you're in the game. And that's what matters at this point. But one thing I love that Doc said, just his bluntness, and they were asking, like, what's your message to your team after a performance like this? And he's like, play right. Like, just play right. Like, you play the game the right way. And you saw it in the third quarter, the 7 minutes when they were playing right, when the ball was moving. Like, we scored every time. So that's something that you have to look at. And I also love that Doc mentioned the fact, like, this isn't a game you just flush. Like, there are some games when you lose, you're just like, you know what? We flush this, we get back to it. It's a long season. He said, not this one. This one was a teaching game. And like, again, yes, there were mistakes on defense, but focus on what you did wrong offensively, because that's what helped put your defense in a bad position to begin with. So I just enjoyed Doc's post-game presser after this one, where he's like, you could tell he was frustrated and he's just like, got to be better. You have to play better. And I love that directness and just saying, like, hey, be accountable. We have to be better. And to your point about the shooting with Malik Beasley, he shot pretty well in February as a whole. He was like 46.5% from 3, and he was scorching hot coming out of All-Star break, which I highlighted. Like, to fend the last 4 games in February, he was shooting over 50% from 3. Calendar turns, it's like the Ides of March, and March has just not been kind to be so far. 2 of 20 from 3, 10% from 3 in the month of March. And Jay Crowder as well. Like we've talked about the defensive effort from Jay has been outstanding. Even Bees, although he wasn't shooting well, I felt like he had a good energy defensively, especially in that third quarter run, the second half. But looking at Jay Crowder's 3-point shooting as well, because he was shooting a little over 50% before he got injured on 3.4 attempts. It was only 9 games before he got hurt. He's come back from the injury in mid-January. He's played 23 games now post-injury. He's 28.2% from three since he's returned, and that's on the same number of attempts. Like Jay Crowder has had 9 games so far during this return stretch over those 23 games where he hasn't made any of his 3-point attempts. So I appreciate the defensive effort, but I also hope to see that the 3 ball starts falling a bit for Jay. Again, not saying I think he's going to shoot 50%. That's unrealistic. But if we can get Jay back up to upper 30s, lower 40s from 3, that's going to be able to help out the team a lot, given what he's able to bring defensively to the team.
Yeah, and I hate to be a broken record, but it really is. You just need Chris Middleton. When you talk about the issues that you had in the half court offensively, and to me again, it was the bench minutes. It's not the Warriors game specifically, but it's what we've seen overall. It's been better of late, but a lot of that bench drop off was the absence of Chris Middleton. This wasn't a bench that was going to be designed to outscore the opposing second unit. It's been the same model we've seen for basically 6 years now for the Bucks. Our starters are very good. We need a bench that's going to play defense and preserve the lead. But Chris Middleton, I keep mentioning his impact on the bench because a lot of those minutes, he was the guy bridging the gap from the starters to the bench. And you would see a lot of Chris with the bench units. A lot of that was when you had Campaign as your backup point guard, and there was some defensive issues there. And Chris was basically your de facto backup point guard, but he was the guy that was getting the second unit organized, basically running the offense, and oh, by the way, scoring. Mm-hmm. And once you started to lose that, and once it was gone consistently, the bench has never really recovered or been the same in terms of their offensive output. So you need Chris Middleton back for that reason. As we mentioned a number of times, you need him back just to weave him in with Giannis and Dame and these different wrinkles that you're seeing from this group. And that's going to help the Jay Crowder piece too, because it's going to limit the spots where you're using Jay Crowder. And again, look, we know, depending on the matchups that you have on the floor, Jay Crowder is most likely to be the guy that the defense in the postseason is going to say, fine, we'll let him shoot it. But it's different if Malik Beasley's hitting shots, if you have Chris Middleton on the floor, if Damian Lillard is out there and Jay Crowder's that fifth guy, that it's, we'll let him take the shots. That's a whole lot different than if this team isn't hitting shots and if Chris Middleton isn't out there, and you have to put other players out there where you need more from Jay Crowder. So I do think that's a big piece of it as well for this group. But the one piece of encouraging news, I think, not to be all negative here, is, well, I suppose number one, that it's nothing, knock on wood, serious for Giannis that we even questioned. I don't know how many games you'll see him on this road trip. He plays game number 1. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to play in all 4, but that's at least a good start. Mm-hmm. The other piece of it, for as much as we mentioned the bad with the score and Malik Beasley shooting of late, Damian Lillard, when you look at Dame coming out of the All-Star break, we had kind of mentioned and hoped, I suppose is the right word, that winning the All-Star MVP and winning the 3-point shootout once again, that these were things that were going to get Damian Lillard going in the second half. And I think so far that's what you've seen when you look at what he's been doing with efficiency. He's shooting 42% on threes coming out of the All-Star break in a stretch of 7 games now for Damian Lillard. So that's something to at least make note of. And his point production still right in line with where it's been, but you've seen that one big game when you really needed it from the Clippers. And I think overall, you've just seen much better play from Dame. Again, it's not to say he was bad before, right, but he's been more efficient offensively. And the same point you made about Malik Beasley and his defense, which should not get lost, of despite the struggles, Malik is still bringing it defensively and putting that effort out there. Damian Lillard has looked much different defensively in the second half as well. So that to me is at least the positive to pull from this. But I agree with what you had said and what Doc Rivers had said too, is this game is actually a pretty good game in terms of the film session because there's the yin and the yang where Doc can easily point to, look at these 5.5 minutes in the third quarter. This is where we did everything we should be doing. And, we outscored them, I think it was 19-5 to start the third quarter. Everywhere else, and even the start to the game to a lesser extent, I'm sure he would say, look, we got to be more controlled those first few minutes, despite the fact that we were putting the first few points on the board. Those stretches you would point to and say, look, here's what we were looking for. We did it. Look at the results. Everything else, we did not do it. And you saw what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love the little positivity sprinkled in there because I do think there is I don't think that this loss should just erase everything we've seen from this team coming out of the break. And they're going to have a chance to rebound on Friday against a Lakers team that's also going to be looking for a rebound as well. So this West Coast road trip does continue. So we'll take a look at that and what's next for the Bucks after this. Personally, I can have a bad habit of procrastinating, and that also comes into play when it comes to events that I do want to attend. I'm like, oh, this sounds really cool, and I might forget about it. And then it's like, oh, wait, this is still happening. Got to try to find tickets. That's why I'm thankful for Game Time. Killer last minute deals, all in prices. You can see the views from your seat. They have a best price guarantee. Like, Game Time just takes all of the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, theater, whatever events near you. And like I mentioned, one of my favorite abilities of Game Time is being able to buy tickets at the very last minute. Plus, you can see the views from your seats before you purchase your tickets at the venue. And it's super clutch to be able to see the actual view from your seat before you buy your ticket, so you know what to expect when you arrive. You don't want to be really geeked to go to this show and then you get there and you find out you're sitting behind a pillar. Like, Game Time is truly the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code Locked On, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The Bucks 4-game road trip continues on into LA, where they play against the Los Angeles Lakers. As mentioned, the Lakers also lost last night. They lost by 10 to the Sacramento Kings in a game that was really big for the standings in the Western Conference. So, we saw the Warriors bounce back after losing big to Boston on Sunday. And I'm hoping now we get to see the Bucks bounce back on Friday against the Lakers. And given everything that Doc mentioned that we've covered already throughout this episode about the areas where the Bucks went wrong, and even the players knew. Brook Lopez mentioned, the ball wasn't moving. It was sticking a bit at times, and you could see that. So hopefully in this game against the Lakers, the Bucks can bounce back. And I feel like the Bucks do tend to, after embarrassing losses for the most part, or games where they feel like they could have been better, they generally do try to come back and correct themselves. So hopefully they play better. I feel like Giannis, when it's a LeBron James matchup, he gets up for that. We'll see if LeBron plays. I know he had the ankle giving him some problems in that Kings game as well. But this Lakers game, another big game for the Bucks here.
Yeah, it is another big game for the Bucks. I assume LeBron will play just because of the matchup of LeBron versus Giannis. And I know this isn't like revenge per se, but Doc Rivers even made the point, I think it was after the home win against the Nuggets, that, we've shown we're pretty good in revenge games. When we need to bounce back and we need to prove something, this team has come together and done that. And I think this is one of those spots where, you had the 6-game win streak. You knew it wasn't going to last forever. Pat Bev joked, we're going to go to 10. You didn't quite get there. But look, you still have a chance at a really good road trip here. I think we talked about this before the trip began and said it's just tough to put a number out there of what your expectations are until we know the health status of Giannis and Chris Middleton. We think we know the status of Giannis. We're still waiting on Chris. But you've got to go at least 2-2 in this road trip here. And look, I still stand by these remaining 3 teams are still good matchups for the Bucks. I think the Lakers are a very good matchup for the Bucks because you do have some size to combat what the Lakers are going to throw out there. You got Giannis and Damian Lillard to go toe-to-toe, you think, with LeBron and Anthony Davis, assuming All of those players play, but this is not a Lakers team that is going to tear it up on the perimeter. So you're going to get a little bit of help there with your perimeter defense. And then again, you're going to catch the Clippers for the second consecutive time on day 2 of a back-to-back. So we'll see where that goes. The Bucks and Clippers have both been very good on night 2 of a back-to-back, but all the little things, they count and they help. So you still have a chance to win these final 3 games and have a really good road trip if this was the one blemish and you learned from it and corrected some of those things. And especially if you can get Chris Middleton back on the floor in the near future here. But in the meantime, I know I wouldn't say come under fire, but I've heard from some Bucks fans and some of the everyday listeners who were quick to point out, look, you said you thought the Bucks were going to finish 3rd, and yet here they are at 2nd in the Eastern Conference. They're getting a lot of help right now with the Cavaliers. Not only losses, they lost again last night, so you get the help there, but the injuries that the Cavaliers are starting to face now. Donovan Mitchell, we know, is going to be out against the Timberwolves on Friday night. I would assume he's going to be out a little bit longer than that if it's a PRP injection. They just lost Evan Mobley in that win against the Celtics, and it sounds like that's going to be like what we're seeing with Chris Middleton. They said weeks, and it's going to take time for Evan Mobley. So those are 2 big absences that the door is now wide open. And I kept pointing to divisional record is going to be the most important thing here, and that was why I did not think the Bucks would hold off the Cavaliers for the 2 spot. I thought at some point they'd catch them, and they have, but Cleveland would eventually move past them because of the schedule difference, because of the fact that you needed the Cavs to go 1-3 in their final 4 divisional games in order to get that tiebreaker. They've gone 1-1 since, and they got 2 games left against the Pacers, and there's a pretty good chance those games are going to be at least without Evan Mobley, maybe without Donovan Mitchell, at least one of them as well. So you're starting to get that help now. Now you just got to start to piece together some of these things that we've mentioned, continuing to improve the offense and just keep playing better. Because that's the biggest takeaway I've had is what Doc Rivers has continued to preach and really drive home to this team is, look, I'm not going to discount these wins. It's nice that we're winning while we're learning these things and improving, but it doesn't mean that everything is fixed. It's still a work in progress. We're still getting better. I see the signs. I like where we're headed, but don't look at these results and that 6-game win streak and the way that we played out of the All-Star break and really the defense since Doc Rivers arrived. Don't look at all that and say, okay, it's fixed. Our work here is done. There's still a lot of work to do. And I think hearing that over and over, but knowing Doc the way that we've gotten to know Doc, hearing the whys and what specifically it is that we need to improve is the big thing for this team.
Yeah, and we're going to see him get a chance to bounce back from that. You mentioned the fact the Cavaliers are facing some injuries right now, and they play Minnesota next. And we just saw this morning that Minnesota is now going to be without Karl Anthony Towns for an indefinite amount of time with a meniscus injury. So you're just like, this is the time of the season where you're hoping for health, which is, again, why I have had no problem with the Bucks slow rolling Chris Middleton back into the lineup. And I have the understanding as well that when he does reinsert himself back into the lineup, it's not going to be at 30 minutes a game immediately, which we saw him working his way up to at the time of his injury. It's going to be another slow roll into it, watching his minutes a bit. And Doc mentioned that's not even just because of the ankle or the knee. It's more so for his conditioning and getting back in the game shape. Like at this point in the season, you're not having live practices. So we're really getting just 2v2 work in, 3v3 work in, 1v1 work. And he's been doing that, but we're going to have to ease him back into it. And health is such an important part of winning a championship. You, of course, have to be playing well, but you need that health luck as well. You want to be healthy rolling into this time of the season. So I understand that with Chris. And the hope is that Giannis, after playing last night, of course, didn't have any additional setbacks and he's able to continue to go. But we're going to see it's a big matchup on Friday night against the Los Angeles Lakers. Primetime television, another 9 p.m. start for the Bucks. It should be fun. We'll, of course, talk more about that matchup on the Friday edition of Locked On Bucks. But for now, that feels like a great place to wrap up. So make sure you all check out Locked On Sports today after we close here today. And for Justin and myself, we'll catch you later.